The Afghan mountains stretched endlessly under the scorching sun, their jagged peaks casting long shadows across the valley where Forward Operating Base Falcon sat like a small fortress of sandbags and steel. Staff Sergeant Marcus Chun wiped the sweat from his brow as he studied the intelligence report that had just landed on his desk. The paper felt heavier than it should have, weighted with the implications of what it contained. "Sir, we've got a problem," Chun said to Colonel James Morrison, the base commander who had seen too many tours and too many problems to count. Morrison looked up from his coffee, the dark circles under his eyes telling the story of another sleepless night in this forgotten corner of the world. The intelligence was clear, but troubling. High-value target Abdul Rahman Zakir, a Taliban commander responsible for coordinating attacks across 3 provinces, had been spotted in a compound approximately 4 kilometers northeast of their position. The distance wasn't the problem, the terrain was. The compound sat on a ridge, surrounded by deep valleys and rocky outcroppings that made a direct assault nearly impossible. Air support was limited due to civilian presence in nearby villages, and the narrow mountain paths meant any ground approach would be suicide. 4,000 meters, Morrison repeated, studying the satellite images spread across his desk. That's beyond the effective range of most of our systems. Chen nodded grimly. They had dealt with long-range targets before, but this was different. The compound was positioned in such a way that there was only one viable shooting position, a rocky outcrop on the opposite ridge that would require a shot across the valley at maximum range. The morning thermal layers, unpredictable wind patterns, and the sheer distance made it one of the most challenging shots anyone could imagine. The base had 13 snipers, each with years of experience and confirmed kills at impressive distances. Morrison called them all together in the briefing room, a cramped space with folding chairs and a whiteboard that had seen better days. The snipers filed in quietly. These were professionals who understood the weight of their craft. Sergeant First Class David Park was the first to examine the target package. At 32, he was considered one of the finest marksmen in the regiment, with a confirmed kill at 2,847 meters during his previous deployment. He studied the photographs and range cards with the intensity of a surgeon examining X-rays. "The wind patterns alone will kill this shot," Park said after several minutes of calculation. "The valley creates thermals that shift every few minutes. By the time you read the conditions and squeeze the trigger, everything's changed." Staff Sergeant Michael Torres, a quiet man from Texas with hands steadier than a surgeon's, took his turn examining the data. Torres had grown up hunting in difficult conditions and understood how terrain affected bullet trajectory better than most. He spent 20 minutes working through calculations on his tablet, factoring in altitude, humidity, and the dozen other variables that would affect a bullet's path over such a distance. Even with perfect conditions, we're looking at a bullet drop of over 30 feet, Torres concluded. The margin of error is so small that a change in humidity of just 10% could cause a complete miss. One by one, each sniper examined the target package and reached similar conclusions. The shot wasn't just difficult, it bordered on impossible. Sergeant Thompson, who had made his reputation in Iraq with shots that other snipers called miraculous, spent an hour running calculations before shaking his head. "I made some lucky shots in my time," Thompson admitted, "but this isn't about luck. This is about physics, and the physics don't add up." As the afternoon wore on, Morrison watched his best marksman struggle with a problem that seemed to have no solution. The intelligence indicated that Zakir would only be in the compound for 48 hours before moving to another location, where he would be much harder to track. This was their window, possibly their only window, and it was closing fast. The snipers continued their analysis through the evening, each hoping to find some angle or approach that the others had missed. They studied topographical maps, weather reports, and ballistics data until their eyes burned from strain. Some suggested alternative approaches, calling in special operations teams for a direct assault, waiting for better intelligence about Zakir's future movements, or requesting priority air support despite the civilian concerns. But Morrison knew that each alternative came with its own problems. Special operations teams were committed to other missions across the region. Intelligence on Zakir's movements was always uncertain, and he had already slipped away from 3 previous operations. Air support in the area was limited due to political sensitivities about civilian casualties, and the narrow window for action was rapidly closing. As night fell over the base, the snipers gathered in the recreation tent to discuss the situation informally. These were men who had spent years perfecting their craft, who understood the science of long-range shooting better than most people understood their own jobs. Yet they found themselves facing a shot that challenged everything they thought they knew about the limits of their profession. The longest confirmed kill in military history is 3,540 meters, said Corporal Jimmy Walsh, a young sniper who had joined the team just 6 months earlier, but had already proven his skills on multiple occasions. That was a Canadian sniper in Iraq with perfect conditions and multiple spotters. This shot is 400 meters beyond that, Park added, with some of the worst conditions you could imagine for long-range shooting. The conversation continued late into the night, with each sniper offering theories and suggestions, but no one could solve the fundamental problem. The distance was simply too great for conventional methods. The bullet would be in flight for over 6 seconds, traveling through changing air densities, unpredictable wind layers, and thermal columns that could push it off target by dozens of feet. Meanwhile, in a corner of the base that most people rarely noticed, Corporal Elena Vasquez was performing maintenance on her rifle. Vasquez was 34 years old and had been in the Army for 14 years, but she moved through the base with a quiet efficiency that often made others forget she was there. She wasn't assigned to the sniper unit. Officially, she was a designated marksman attached to the base security team. But anyone who had served with her knew that designation didn't reflect her true capabilities. Vasquez had grown up in rural Montana, where her father had taught her to shoot at distances that most people considered impossible. She had learned to read wind patterns by watching grass move in fields, to calculate bullet drop by observing the flight of birds, and to understand the subtle ways that temperature and humidity affected projectile trajectories. Her father had been a competition shooter before joining the Army himself, and he had passed on not just technical knowledge, but an almost intuitive understanding of how bullets behaved over long distances. During her years of military service, Vasquez had consistently scored among the top marksmen in her units, but she had never sought the recognition that came with official sniper designation. She preferred to work quietly, to solve problems without fanfare, and to let her performance speak for itself. Her superiors recognized her abilities, but in a male-dominated world of military marksmanship, she often found herself overlooked for high-profile assignments. As she cleaned her rifle that evening, Vasquez overheard conversations about the impossible shot that had stumped 13 of the Army's best snipers. She listened to their discussions about wind patterns and thermal layers, bullet trajectories, and margin of error, and she began to form her own understanding of the problem they were trying to solve. The next morning brought news that made the situation even more urgent. Intelligence reports indicated increased activity around Zakir's compound, suggesting that his departure might be imminent. Morrison called another meeting with the sniper team, hoping that a night of rest might have brought new insights or solutions. The meeting was shorter than the previous day's session. Each sniper reconfirmed their earlier assessments, and several offered alternative strategies that might have higher chances of success. But Morrison could see in their faces that they remained convinced the shot was beyond their capabilities. "Sir," Park said finally, "I think we need to consider that this target might be out of reach with current resources and conditions." Morrison nodded slowly, understanding the difficult position his snipers were in. These were men who had built their careers on making impossible shots, but they were also professionals who understood their limitations. Recommending against a shot wasn't a sign of weakness. It was a recognition of reality. As the meeting broke up, Vasquez appeared in the doorway of the briefing room. She had never attended one of these tactical meetings before, and her presence surprised several of the snipers. Morrison looked up questioningly. "Colonel," Vasquez said quietly, I'd like to examine the target package. The room fell silent. Several of the snipers exchanged glances, unsure how to respond to this unexpected development. Vasquez wasn't part of their unit, and while everyone knew she was skilled, this wasn't her area of responsibility. Morrison studied her for a moment. He had seen Vasquez's qualification scores, and he knew that her shooting abilities were exceptional even by military standards. More importantly, he had learned during his years of command that good ideas could come from unexpected sources. "Show her the materials," Morrison said. For the next hour, Vasquez studied the same photographs, range cards, and weather data that had challenged 13 experienced snipers. She examined satellite images of the terrain, calculated ballistic trajectories on her tablet, and asked detailed questions about ammunition types and rifle configurations. The snipers watched with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism as she worked through the same problems they had spent 2 days analyzing. Finally, Vasquez looked up from the materials. "I think it can be done," she said simply. The reaction was immediate and mixed. Several snipers began to object, explaining the technical challenges they had identified. Others asked for her reasoning, wondering what approach she had discovered that they had missed. "The key," Vasquez explained, "isn't trying to compensate for all the variables. It's finding a moment when the variables align." She pointed to the weather data, showing how wind patterns in the valley followed predictable cycles based on temperature changes throughout the day. "There's a 15-minute window each morning, right after sunrise, when the thermal activity is minimal and the wind patterns stabilize." Torres studied the data she was referencing. "That window exists," he agreed, "but the margin of error is still enormous. Even with perfect conditions, you're looking at a target zone the size of a dinner plate at 4,000 meters. "That's assuming conventional shooting techniques," Vasquez replied. "But this isn't a conventional shot." She explained her approach with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent years thinking about problems that others considered unsolvable. Where the other snipers had focused on overcoming the challenges posed by distance and environment, Vasquez had looked for ways to work within those constraints. Her strategy involved a combination of careful timing, unconventional positioning, and shooting techniques that pushed the boundaries of established doctrine. Instead of fighting the environmental factors, she planned to use them to her advantage, timing her shot to coincide with predictable wind patterns and taking a firing position that would optimize her angle of engagement. "The longest shots in history weren't made by the best marksmen," she said. "They were made by marksmen who understood that sometimes the impossible becomes possible when you approach it differently." Morrison listened to her explanation with growing interest. Vasquez's approach was unconventional, even radical by some standards, but it was based on solid technical understanding and years of practical experience. More importantly, she was offering a solution when everyone else had concluded that no solution existed. "You're confident you can make this shot?" Morrison asked. Vasquez considered the question carefully before answering. "I'm confident I can take the shot. Whether it succeeds depends on factors beyond anyone's control. But I believe the attempt is worth making." The room remained silent as Morrison weighed his options. He had 13 experienced snipers telling him the shot was impossible and one relatively unknown marksman saying she could do what they couldn't. The decision would affect not just the mission, but potentially the lives of soldiers under his command. "Walk me through your plan step by step," Morrison said finally. For the next 2 hours, Vasquez detailed every aspect of her proposed approach. She explained how she would position herself on the ridge, how she would read and compensate for environmental conditions, and how she would time her shot to maximize the probability of success. She answered technical questions from the other snipers, many of whom began to see merit in her unconventional methods, even if they remained skeptical about her chances of success. Park, who had initially been the most vocal about the shot's impossibility, found himself impressed by the depth of her preparation. "Your calculations are sound," he admitted. "I still think the odds are against you, but your approach is better than anything we developed." As the discussion continued, Morrison realized that Vasquez had accomplished something remarkable. She had taken a problem that had stumped his entire sniper team and developed a credible solution. Whether that solution would work remained to be seen, but for the first time in 2 days, he felt hope that the mission might succeed. The decision, when it came, surprised no one who knew Morrison's leadership style. He had built his career on taking calculated risks when conventional approaches failed, and he recognized that this situation called for exactly that kind of thinking. "Corporal Vasquez," Morrison said, "you have authorization to attempt the shot." The words hung in the air like a challenge to physics itself. In less than 24 hours, a quiet woman from Montana would attempt something that 13 experienced snipers had deemed impossible. The mountains of Afghanistan had seen many remarkable feats of marksmanship over the years, but nothing quite like what was about to unfold. As the meeting dispersed, Vasquez began her final preparations with the methodical precision that had characterized her entire military career. She had convinced her commander that the impossible shot could be made. Now she had to prove it. The pre-dawn darkness over forward operating base Falcon was broken only by the soft glow of red-filtered flashlights as Corporal Elena Vasquez conducted her final equipment checks. Every piece of gear had been inspected, tested, and arranged with the precision of a surgeon preparing for a complex operation. Her rifle, a customized M2010 enhanced sniper rifle, lay disassembled on her bunk as she examined each component under magnification. Vasquez had spent the previous evening working with the base armor to make subtle modifications to her weapon system. The rifle had been zeroed and re-zeroed at various distances, with special attention paid to the precise mounting of her optics. She had selected ammunition from 3 different lots, testing each for consistency and choosing the rounds that showed the tightest groupings during her practice sessions. Master Sergeant Kevin Blake, the senior sniper instructor who had flown in from Bugram Airfield specifically for this mission, watched her preparations with professional interest. Blake had trained hundreds of snipers during his 20-year career, and he recognized the signs of someone who understood their craft at a fundamental level. Most snipers at this point will be checking their range cards for the 100th time, Blake observed. "You're checking your ammunition headspace measurements." Vasquez looked up from the calipers she was using to measure cartridge variations. "Range cards tell you where to aim," she replied. "Ammunition consistency tells you where the bullet will actually go." This attention to minute details had characterized Vasquez's approach to the mission from the moment she received authorization to attempt the shot. While other snipers might have focused on the psychological pressure of such a high-stakes mission, Vasquez had immersed herself in the technical aspects of long-range shooting that would make or break her attempt. She had spent hours studying meteorological data for the region, learning how wind patterns develop throughout the day based on solar heating and topographical features. The valleys and ridges of this part of Afghanistan created their own microclimate, and she needed to understand how air masses move through the terrain at different times and altitudes. Working with the base intelligence team, Vasquez had obtained detailed topographical surveys of the area between her planned firing position and the target compound. She calculated not just the direct distance of 4,000 meters, but the varying elevations along the bullet's path and how those changes would affect air density and projectile behavior. The physics of such a shot were staggering. Her bullet would travel for approximately 5.7 seconds, during which it would drop nearly 40 feet due to gravity and drift several feet laterally due to environmental factors. The projectile would experience different wind conditions at various altitudes, passing through thermal layers and air masses with different temperatures and densities. The bullet starts at 2,800 feet per second, Vasquez explained to Blake as she loaded her selected ammunition into magazines. By the time it reaches the target, it's down to about 1,200 feet per second. That's a huge change in kinetic energy and trajectory characteristics. Blake nodded, understanding the implications. Most sniper training focused on shots where the bullet retained enough velocity to maintain relatively predictable flight characteristics. At 4,000 meters, They were entering territory where traditional ballistic calculations became increasingly unreliable. The target itself presented additional challenges beyond the extreme range. Abdul Rahman Zakir was a careful man who had survived years of coalition efforts to eliminate him. Intelligence indicated that he spent most of his time inside the compound's main building, only emerging for brief periods to meet with subordinates or perform religious observances. "We've identified a pattern," explained Captain Sarah Mitchell, the intelligence officer who had been tracking Zakir's movements. "He comes out onto the compound's eastern terrace every morning around 0630 for approximately 10 minutes. That's our window." The terrace was a concrete platform approximately 15 feet square, surrounded by a low wall that provided some cover, but left the center area exposed to long-range observation. Satellite imagery showed that Zakir typically stood near the terrace's eastern edge, where he had a clear view of the valley below. Vasquez studied the photographs with particular attention to shadows and light patterns. The terrace faced east, which meant it would be illuminated by direct sunlight during Zakir's morning appearances. This created both opportunities and challenges for a sniper positioned on a western ridge. "The backlight will make target identification easier," she noted, "but it also means any scope reflection could give away my position." To address this concern, she had worked with the base's fabrication team to create custom anti-reflective shields for her optics. The devices were simple but effective, using angled metal plates to prevent sunlight from striking the objective lens while still allowing clear observation of the target area. As the night progressed, Vasquez continued her methodical preparations. She studied satellite weather data, noting wind speeds and directions at various altitudes. She reviewed thermal imagery of the target area, learning how the compound structures affected local air currents. She even examined historical data on atmospheric pressure patterns for the region, understanding that changes in barometric pressure could affect bullet trajectory over such distances. At 0300 hours, Vasquez began her movement to the firing position. The journey to the western ridge required a 2-kilometer hike through difficult terrain, carrying not just a rifle and ammunition, but also the supporting equipment necessary for such a complex shot. Accompanying her were Staff Sergeant Chun as her spotter and Corporal Martinez from the communications team. Chun had volunteered for the assignment, despite his initial skepticism about the mission's chances of success. His role would be crucial. At 4,000 meters, even minor errors in range estimation or wind calculation could result in complete failure. The movement to the firing position took place under complete light discipline, using night vision equipment to navigate the rocky terrain. Vasquez had studied the route extensively during daylight hours, identifying potential obstacles and planning rest stops where the team could remain concealed from observation. "This ridge has been used before," Chun whispered as they approached their destination. Intelligence found evidence of Taliban observation posts in the area. Vasquez nodded, understanding the implications. The firing position offered an excellent view of the target area, which meant it was also tactically significant to enemy forces. They would need to approach carefully and be prepared for the possibility that the position was under surveillance. The team reached their planned firing position at 0445 hours, giving them nearly 2 hours to prepare for the shot window. The position was a natural depression in the rocky ridge, providing concealment while offering a clear line of sight to the target compound across the valley. Vasquez immediately began setting up her rifle system with the precision of someone who had practiced the process hundreds of times. The M2010 was mounted on a specialized bipod system that allowed for minute adjustments in elevation and cant. She positioned the rifle carefully, using a digital level to ensure perfect alignment with the target bearing. Chun established his spotting position 3 feet to Vasquez's left, setting up a high-powered spotting scope that would allow him to observe the target area and provide real-time information about environmental conditions. His scope was equipped with a laser rangefinder and ballistic calculator, though at such extreme range, these technological aids would provide only estimates that would need to be refined through observation and experience. As dawn approached, the valley began to show the first signs of thermal activity that would affect their shot. Vasquez watched through her scope as wisps of mist rose from the compound's courtyard, indicating the beginning of the daily heating cycle that would create air currents and thermal layers. Wind is variable from the northeast at 3 to 7 knots at our altitude, Chen reported, reading from his meteorological instruments. Valley winds are starting to develop as the sun hits the eastern slopes. This was the critical period that Vasquez had identified during her planning. The wind patterns were transitioning from the stable nighttime conditions to the chaotic thermal activity that would dominate during daylight hours. Somewhere in this transition was the window of opportunity she needed. At 0615 hours, movement appeared on the compound's eastern terrace. Through her scope, Vasquez could see several figures emerging from the main building, but she needed positive identification of the target before taking any action. "I have 3 individuals on the terrace," Chen reported through his spotting scope. Adult males, traditional dress. The center figure matches the target profile. Vasquez adjusted her scope's magnification, bringing the target area into sharp focus. At 4,000 meters, even through high-powered optics, the figures appeared small and indistinct. Positive identification would require careful observation and confirmation from multiple sources. Facial recognition software confirms target identification, reported Martinez, monitoring intelligence feeds from drone assets in the area. Target is in position on the eastern edge of the terrace. The moment Vasquez had prepared for was finally at hand. Zakir stood approximately 12 feet from the terrace's eastern wall, well within the exposure zone that would allow for a clear shot. The question was whether she could deliver a bullet accurately across 4,000 meters of challenging terrain and atmospheric conditions. She began her final calculations, taking into account the current wind readings, atmospheric pressure, temperature, and humidity. Her ballistic calculator provided initial estimates, but at such extreme range, these would serve only as starting points for adjustments based on observation and experience. Range confirmed at 4,003 meters, Chen reported. Target elevation is 347 feet above our position. Wind at target appears to be northeast at 4 knots. Vasquez made minute adjustments to her scope settings, compensating for the various factors that would affect her bullet's trajectory. The process required absolute precision. At this distance, an error of even 1/10 of a milliradian could result in a miss by several feet. Through her scope, she could see Zakir clearly now. He was standing in conversation with 2 subordinates, periodically gesturing toward different parts of the valley. Intelligence reports suggested these morning meetings were tactical planning sessions where Zakir coordinated activities with his local commanders. Wind conditions are stabilizing, Chen observed. Thermal activity is minimal for the next 8 to 10 minutes. This was the window Vasquez had identified during her planning, the brief period after sunrise when atmospheric conditions were most predictable. If she was going to take the shot, it would have to be within the next few minutes. She controlled her breathing, following the techniques she had practiced thousands of times during training and combat operations. Her heart rate needed to be calm and steady, her muscle tension minimal, her focus absolute. At such extreme range, even a slight movement caused by a heartbeat could affect accuracy. "I'm taking the shot," Vasquez announced quietly into her radio. The words marked the beginning of a process that had been rehearsed extensively, but never tested under such extreme conditions. Vasquez settled into her final firing position, her body aligned perfectly with the rifle's natural point of aim. She placed her finger on the trigger, feeling the familiar resistance of the weapon's 2-stage trigger system. Through her scope, Zakir remained in position on the terrace, unaware that 4,000 meters away, a sniper was preparing to attempt one of the longest shots in military history. The morning sun illuminated his figure clearly against the concrete background of the terrace. Vasquez took a deep breath, let half of it out, and began the slow, steady trigger squeeze that would send a bullet on a trajectory across the valley. The rifle's trigger broke cleanly, and the weapon discharged with a sharp crack that echoed off the surrounding ridges. The bullet began its journey immediately, traveling at nearly 3 times the speed of sound as it left the rifle's muzzle. For the first kilometer of its flight, it maintained most of its initial velocity, following a trajectory that had been calculated down to the smallest mathematical details. But as the projectile continued its flight, it began to encounter the various atmospheric conditions that would determine its ultimate fate. Wind layers at different altitudes pushed it slightly off course. Changes in air density affected its stability. The inexorable pull of gravity gradually curved its path downward. Shot fired. Chin reported into his radio, beginning the countdown that would tell them whether months of preparation and years of experience had been enough to accomplish the impossible. For 5.7 seconds, the bullet flew through space while Vasquez and Chun waited to see the results of their work. At such extreme range, there would be no immediate indication of impact. They would have to wait and watch, hoping that their calculations had been correct and their execution flawless. In the compound across the valley, Zakir continued his conversation with his subordinates, completely unaware that his life hung in the balance of physics and precision marksmanship. The next few seconds would determine whether Elena Vasquez had solved the problem that had stumped 13 experienced snipers, or whether the laws of physics would prove that some shots were simply beyond human capability. The answer was already traveling through the morning air at 1,200 feet per second, carrying with it the hopes and fears of everyone who had believed the impossible could be made possible through skill, determination, and perfect execution. The 5.7 seconds of bullet flight felt like an eternity to Elena Vasquez as she maintained her position behind the rifle scope, watching the distant terrace where her target stood unaware of the projectile racing toward him through the morning air. At such extreme range, there was no sound, no visible trace of the bullet's path, only the waiting and the hope that months of preparation had been enough. "Time," whispered Staff Sergeant Chun, his voice barely audible through the radio headset as he tracked the seconds on his chronometer. Through her scope, Vasquez saw the impact before she heard it. Zakir's body jerked suddenly, his conversation with his subordinates interrupted by the arrival of a bullet that had traveled farther than any confirmed military sniper kill in history. The high-value target collapsed instantly, the kinetic energy of the projectile delivering its lethal payload with devastating precision. A fraction of a second later, the sound of the impact reached their position as a faint crack echoing across the valley. Chin's spotting scope confirmed what Vasquez had already seen through her rifle optics. "Target down," Chin reported, his voice carrying a mixture of professional satisfaction and amazement. "Clean hit, center mass." The two subordinates on the terrace reacted with confusion and panic, seeking cover while trying to understand what had happened to their commander. In the compound below, figures emerged from buildings and began moving with the urgent purpose of people responding to a crisis. But for Vasquez, the immediate tactical situation was secondary to the technical achievement she had just accomplished. She had succeeded where 13 experienced snipers had concluded success was impossible. The shot that stumped the Army's best marksman had been executed with the precision of a surgeon and the patience of a hunter. 4,003 meters, she said quietly, more to herself than to her spotter. Clean kill. The confirmation came through multiple sources over the next few minutes. Drone assets in the area provided visual confirmation of the target's elimination. Intelligence intercepts captured frantic communications from the compound as subordinates struggled to understand how their leader had been killed without any visible attackers in the area. Colonel Morrison's voice crackled through the radio from the base operations center. "Falcon 6 to Overwatch. Confirm target status." "Overwatch to Falcon 6, Chin responded. "Target eliminated. Single shot. Confirmed kill at 4,003 meters. Recommend immediate extraction." The recommendation was sound tactical thinking. While Vasquez's shooting position provided excellent concealment, the successful elimination of such a high-value target would inevitably trigger a massive search effort by Taliban forces in the area. Every minute they remained in position increased the risk of discovery and engagement. Vasquez began breaking down her rifle system with the same methodical precision she had used to set it up. Each component was carefully secured and packed, ensuring that no evidence of their presence would remain behind. The brass casing from her shot was collected and secured at such extreme range. Even the spent cartridge case contained forensic information that could be valuable to enemy intelligence efforts. As they prepared to move out, Chun took a final look at the target area through his spotting scope. The compound was now bustling with activity as security personnel and medical teams responded to the shooting. But their search efforts were focused in completely the wrong direction, examining areas much closer to the compound where conventional wisdom suggested an attack might have originated. They have no idea where that shot came from, Chun observed. Even if they find our position, they won't believe it's possible to shoot accurately at this range. The comment reflected a broader truth about Vasquez's achievement. The shot had not just eliminated a high-value target. It had pushed the boundaries of what was considered possible in military marksmanship. The 4,003-meter shot exceeded the previous longest confirmed military sniper kill by more than 450 meters, establishing a new record that would be studied and analyzed for years to come. The extraction movement back to forward operating base Falcon took place without incident. Vasquez and her team moved carefully through the rocky terrain, using the same concealment techniques that had allowed them to reach their firing position undetected. The successful completion of the mission had eliminated the immediate tactical threat, but the larger strategic implications were only beginning to unfold. Back at the base, word of the successful shot spread quickly through the military communications networks. Within hours, requests for detailed briefings were coming in from division headquarters, Special Operations Command, and sniper schools throughout the military. The achievement represented not just a tactical success, but a significant advancement in long-range marksmanship capabilities. Master Sergeant Blake was among the first to debrief Vasquez upon her return to base. As a senior instructor responsible for developing sniper techniques and training protocols, he understood the broader implications of what she had accomplished. "Walk me through your wind calculation at the moment of the shot," Blake requested, his notebook ready to capture the technical details that would eventually become part of official training materials. Vasquez reviewed her calculations with the same precision she had applied to the shot itself. Wind at our altitude was northeast at 5 knots. At target altitude, I estimated northeast at 4 knots based on visual indicators. But the critical factor was the thermal layer at approximately 2,500 meters. She explained how she had identified a temperature inversion layer roughly halfway along the bullet's trajectory, where warm air rising from the valley floor met cooler air from the upper elevations. This created a zone of stable air density that helped maintain the projectile's trajectory during the critical middle portion of its flight. Most of the ballistic calculators don't account for thermal layers at this range, Blake noted. You were essentially shooting by instinct and experience. Not instinct, Vasquez corrected. Observation and calculation. The thermal patterns were visible if you knew what to look for. This attention to environmental details that other snipers had missed or dismissed as unimportant had been crucial to her success. While the 13 other marksmen had focused on the mathematical impossibility of the shot, Vasquez had looked for ways to work within the constraints of physics rather than against them. The ammunition she had selected also proved critical to the shot's success. Her careful measurement of cartridge variations and selection of rounds from specific manufacturing lots had minimized the ballistic inconsistencies that could cause significant accuracy problems at extreme range. The difference between the fastest and slowest bullets in a standard lot can be 60 feet per second. She explained to the gathering crowd of snipers who had come to understand how she had accomplished what they had deemed impossible. At 4,000 meters, that velocity difference translates to a miss by several feet. By testing ammunition lots and selecting only the most consistent rounds, she had eliminated one of the major variables that affected long-range accuracy. This level of preparation went far beyond standard military protocols, representing the kind of competitive shooting techniques that were rarely applied to combat situations. The rifle modifications she had implemented also contributed to the shot's success. Working with the base armor, she had made subtle adjustments to the trigger system, stock configuration, and optics mounting that optimized the weapon for extreme-range shooting. These modifications were within regulation, but represented a level of customization that most military snipers never attempted. She essentially built a custom rifle system using standard components. The armorer explained to Colonel Morrison during his technical briefing. Every modification was designed to reduce the variables that affect accuracy at extreme range. As news of the record-setting shot spread throughout the military community, requests began arriving for Vasquez to share her techniques with sniper instructors and advanced marksmanship programs. The 4,003-meter shot had not just eliminated a tactical target. It had opened new possibilities for long-range engagement capabilities. But for Vasquez herself, the achievement represented something more personal than professional advancement. She had spent 14 years in the military demonstrating exceptional shooting skills while working in the background of a profession dominated by male colleagues. The impossible shot had finally provided undeniable proof of capabilities that many had underestimated or overlooked. "I never set out to break records," she told Morrison during their private debriefing session. "I just saw a problem that needed solving and approached it like any other technical challenge." This matter-of-fact attitude toward her historic achievement reflected the professional mindset that had made the shot possible in the first place. Where others had seen an impossible challenge, Vasquez had seen a complex problem that could be solved through careful preparation, technical understanding, and flawless execution. The strategic impact of eliminating Zakir became apparent over the following weeks as Taliban operations in the region showed clear signs of disruption. Intelligence reports indicated that his death had created significant command and control problems for insurgent forces across 3 provinces. The single shot had achieved tactical effects that would have required major military operations using conventional approaches. For the 13 snipers who had initially concluded the shot was impossible, Vasquez's success provided valuable lessons about the importance of challenging conventional assumptions and exploring unconventional solutions. Several requested detailed briefings on her techniques, hoping to incorporate her methods into their own capabilities. "She didn't just make an impossible shot," Staff Sergeant Torres admitted during one of these sessions. "She showed us that we were defining impossible too narrowly." The technical analysis of the shot continued for months as ballistics experts and military researchers studied every aspect of Vasquez's achievement. Computer simulations confirmed that her calculations had been remarkably accurate, with the bullet following a trajectory that differed from her predictions by less than 6 inches at the point of impact. Advanced weather modeling revealed that she had indeed identified and exploited a brief window of optimal atmospheric conditions. The thermal stability she had observed was confirmed by meteorological data, validating her unconventional approach to reading environmental factors at extreme range. The rifle and ammunition she had used were subjected to extensive testing to verify their performance characteristics. Laboratory analysis confirmed that her ammunition selection had been crucial to the shot's success, with the specific lot showing velocity variations of less than 15 feet per second. Exceptional consistency for military-grade ammunition. Within 6 months of the record-setting shot, Vasquez found herself reassigned to the U.S. Army Marksmanship Unit, where she would help develop new training protocols for extreme-range shooting. Her techniques were incorporated into advanced sniper courses, and her achievement became a case study in military academies worldwide. The quiet woman from Montana, who had spent years working in the background, had finally received recognition commensurate with her extraordinary abilities. But, more importantly, she had proven that sometimes the most challenging problems could be solved by those willing to see beyond conventional limitations. The 4,003-meter shot remained a record for several years, standing as testament to what was possible when exceptional skill met perfect preparation and flawless execution. It had taken 13 experienced snipers to conclude that the shot was impossible, but only one determined woman to prove them wrong. Years later, when military historians studied the evolution of long-range marksmanship, Vasquez's achievement was recognized not just as a record-setting shot, but as a turning point in military thinking about the possibilities and limitations of precision fire. She had shown that the impossible could become possible when approached with sufficient knowledge, preparation, and determination. The mountains of Afghanistan had witnessed many remarkable feats during decades of conflict, but few had demonstrated so clearly that human capability, properly applied, could overcome seemingly insurmountable challenges. Elena Vasquez had not just made history. She had redefined what history thought was possible.